Greetings and welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Communications and Engagement with ABWE, joined once more by Pastor Scott Dunford, appreciator of small red bugs and grandchildren, and pastor of Western Hills Church in San Mateo, California. And we are continuing part 2 this week of our discussion with E.D. Burns, who joins us again. E.D. is the Executive Director of Training and Development for ABWE. And so if you're someone who's considering taking your next steps to reach the nations, who knows, you might find yourself in a conversation with E.D. and receiving some of his missionary wisdom and experience and theological insight as a part of your preparation journey to the mission field. But what we want to do is just dive right back in. When we left the conversation last, E.D., we were talking about, of course, there's different approaches to apologetics. We talked about cultural apologetics, popularized by C.S. Lewis, but there's presuppositional apologetics, where we're trying to get people into the Bible and to critique their own worldviews. We talked about classical apologetics, the older proofs of God's existence that the church has maintained and argued about and reasoned with logically. There's evidentialist apologetics. You see a lot of that, especially in something like the Case for Christ. You know, what are the forensic evidences or historic evidences that Jesus rose from the dead? You know, there's multiple ways to approach the art and science of defending the faith. But really what we want to do is think about what that looks like in action in a new cultural context that's not our own. And so I want to hand it back over to you and continue to walk us through, how do we faithfully and biblically practice cultural apologetics wherever the Lord has called us to serve?
Yeah, so just by way of reminder, I was saying in the last episode that cultural apologetics appeals to the imagination or the desirability of the gospel. And it in a way, it seeks to awaken in people a desire to know more, a desire for kind of the puzzles of the universe to be put together. And so my approach here in Asia, and I just taught this class in Bangkok a month or so ago, and my students found the approach really helpful. And it's the approach of asking good questions and in not just evangelism monologues, though I actually think, and I write in my book, The Transcultural Gospel, there is a place for the monologue evangelism approach, but something else has to actually happen first before people want to sit through that. And to presume upon their time and their attention by skipping over kind of that appeal to the imagination or that desire, I think you're doing yourself no favors by going straight to content data download, but wanting to get to that point where they want to know, just like C.S. Lewis says, I believe in the sun, not because I see it, but because I see everything because of it. And if you can speak about life, and you can speak about the created order and just everything under God's good reign, and speak about it in a way that it makes sense in Christianity, at least it starts to communicate this notion that there is a wholeness to Christianity that is actually desirable. There's something beautiful about the Christian tradition and the Christian way of viewing life that makes them want to know more. And then the gospel has kind of like an open door straight into that soul, because you can then communicate the goodness of the cross and penal substitutionary atonement and the badness of Adam's sin and his guilt and his corruption. And so to get to that point where they want to hear that's what cultural apologetics does. And so this is kind of my approach, and this is how I do it with my students, is I use the kind of the J. Gresham Machen steps to getting to the gospel, where you have the gospel is history, that Christ died, and that's news. That's news. That has been. It's not past. It's past. It's not future. It's not advice. It's news. It's not just history, because you could be a secular historian in an Ivy League school and admit to that fact. but it's more than that. It's theology, that Christ died for sins. And that's good news. That solves a problem, and it is indeed good news. But it's one step beyond that also. It's gospel that Christ died for my sins, and that's with the definite article, the good news. It's not just good news, it's the exclusive good news, because it's for me. It's a personalized gospel. And so when you are talking with people and they have resistance to maybe Christianity or the Bible or the sufficiency of Scripture or the gospel or the person and work of Christ, asking initial kind of those historical questions like, well, what do you mean by that? Or, actually querying source, authority, and definition. So asking people, how do you know that? Where did you get that from? What do you mean? And try to poke pinholes in their worldview, in their system of thinking, their cultural value system, and let it slowly seep out. And then force definitions like, well, to define terms. What do you mean when you say that word? What does that word mean? And a lot of times they just get kind of jumbled up in their thinking, and so they don't actually get anywhere, but they realize that whatever they're thinking is built upon kind of just parroting something else they've heard, and they've maybe not thought through this. That's the first step to just at least starting to undermine their confidence in their value system. That's the first step. And then start asking about, those are questions of kind of fact, things they know, and then ask questions of meaning, theological questions, like more kind of pondering, the problems in the world and a solution. Like everybody's got an original problem they're trying to solve. None of us, know our biblical history, so we don't know about Adam's guilt and his corruption that are passed on to us since he was our federal head. And we don't know how the last Adam satisfies that. But everybody feels like their real problem is maybe shame or fear or weakness or bondage. Those are all legitimate human problems that correspond to and grow out of our guilt problem in Adam. Those are all derivative of our guilt problem and our corruption problem, but they're not the main problem.
And if I could just hop in there as well, too, what you just said in 1 minute, you've done lots of work developing that, because in the Christian missions community right now, there's multiple, but there's a school of thought in particular that says, you've heard that the gospel is good news about guilt and forgiveness. But I say to you, it's not just that, it's also honor and shame and fear and power. And really what you need to do is divest yourself of kind of your Western context and stop thinking in terms of guilt and innocence and start to think only in terms of either experiencing shame or being rescued to experience honor, or being afraid of spirits, powers, entities around you and experiencing deliverance from that fear and gaining power over your surroundings. Now, that's an oversimplification, but what you're saying is, look, these different themes and desires and impulses of the human heart, they don't have to fight against each other. And all of them do correspond centrally to what the scripture describes as a sin problem, which is a guilt and innocence problem. And it leads to these other things. But that doesn't mean we throw away one way of talking about the gospel. It means that we talk about it in complementary ways. It's one jewel with multiple facets, and you can emphasize one thing over another. But really what you're doing is kind of resolving something that's been a point of controversy in the missions community. Is that fair to say, ED? We hope you're enjoying this conversation about missions theology and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. And you know that part of the mission of this show is to do exactly that, to take people thinking about the Great Commissions and how to impact the world and actually help them go. My question is that you? Or is that a loved one, someone that you know? If you're interested in learning what it looks like to take your next steps onto the mission field, even if you're afraid, our team would love to talk with you, to pray with you, not to pressure you into anything, but to help you and your sending church discern the Lord's direction in your life. Go to abwe.org/sendme, all one word. There you can connect with our team. So if the Lord's putting on your heart, maybe you need to take some of this listening and thinking and put some shoe leather to your faith. Go to abwe.org/sendme. and connect with our mobilization team today.
Yeah, a couple things about that is those are all, like I said, those are all valid problems that are addressed by the Bible, but they're not the main problem. They're, like I said, they're tributaries or they're derivative of the main problem. This is the difference between a culture first approach to evangelism and apologetics or a gospel textual approach to evangelism and apologetics. The whole notion is that, well, all these evangelism strategies have come from the West, and the West is a guilt innocence culture, which, I mean, these are all really, frankly, they're really generic observations about people and places. Even if you say, well, Asian culture is honor shame. I mean, then you have to actually push back and say things like, well, what Asian culture are we talking? Like, Chinese culture or Turkmeni culture or Afghan culture or Indonesian culture. I mean, what are we talking? And then underneath all of those are just nation states where they've got hundreds and sometimes thousands of different dialects represented, and they identify as not being part of that nation state. And so you have layers and layers of complexities of cultures and ethnic identities that it's sloppy terminology and missiology, and of all people, missiologists should know better. But I think the only way forward is to use biblical language and define, meaning in the world and bring the felt needs of people, which are legitimate needs, like the need to find a way out of shame or a way out of fear. Well, access those, but point to how they're rightly ordered in the Bible. Like that's the issue is it rightly ordered under the lordship of Christ and the written word, and making sense of what they're feeling and seeing in their life and validating their humanity, the problem of a broken humanity, but not starting there, like starting with the problem in Adam and then showing how all of this makes sense. And that actually I would argue that it's not guilt innocence, it's guilt righteousness is the biblical approach. Maybe you might say the Western approach is guilt innocence, but this is the problem because in a Western, let's say a Western democracy, the law can mandate that you don't murder, but only God's law mandates that you love everybody as yourself. The law in a Western system forbids you from doing certain things, but God's law commands you positively to go the extra mile. It's not enough just to not hate somebody. You must love people. And so that's righteousness is positive earning merits. It's not just avoiding demerits. It's actually accruing merits that please God. And so that's part of the issue is it's not that we're just not innocent. The issue is that we're not righteous. We don't love God and love our neighbor and fulfill the law of God as we ought. And so that's a rightly ordered system. You have to show people, well, what you're feeling is valid, but what's more, you might be afraid of demons. And I live in a village and there are manifest demonic experiences that people have. And demons are a scary thing. Like they're actual evil spirits. They're evil beings that torment people, and they torment the minds and imaginations of people. But people should, the fear they have for the supernatural is nothing compared to the fear of God that we ought to have. And that's the problem, is there's no fear of God in the face of man too often. It takes an earthquake or it takes a cataclysm to wake people up and to fear God. I mean, demons don't cause earthquakes. God does. And it's rightly ordered fear that of all things, we must fear God. Those demons are under God's judgment, but he's king of them. He's king over them, And so we got to draw people out of their immediate needs and show them their real needs under Christ's lordship and the written word. This is kind of how I would frame the cultural apologetics approach is, there's a variety of different ways to do this in Christian tradition. This is just my personal approach is I talk about, and for my Thai students, according to my Thai students, in 2 different times I've taught this, they've said these 3 longings of the soul really connect to the Thai value systems. And I wasn't actually trying to do that. It's probably because I've, been been in this world for so long, it's just kind of intuitively comes to me. But this is how I do it. I talk about the three longings of the soul, and there are more to be sure, but these are the standard three I use. A longing for home, or as Chesterton calls it, the pilgrim longing. He says we are pilgrims even at home. There's this kind of this acknowledgement that every time you go back to that place that you consider to be true home, like probably your growing up years, maybe the favorite house that you lived in, or maybe it was your grandparents' house or something, but you think about those nostalgic feelings of warmth and security. And if you ever go back and actually visit what feels like home in your memory, it's never there. Like even if mom and dad are still living in that actual house, they're wearing their years hard on their face. The smile lines that they used to have when you knew them in their 40s and 50s, or they're now haggard and they're old and they're bent over. And the field you used to play in with your friends is now a strip mall. Your old school is now a parking lot. The forest is just a bunch of suburban houses, and nobody that you knew is around anymore. And all your memories, every time you go there, it's like you wish that you never had to go back again, because
I want you to emphasize this point for our producer, Brian, so that he doesn't move back to Michigan and then we're on our own to produce this show again. So just real loud and clear into the mic. I know, Bon Jovi asked, like, who says he can't go home? Like, you can't go home. Just so we're clear. Continue.
I don't know. It's worse that he wants to go back or you listen to Bon Jovi, but it doesn't matter. Or you know enough about him. So I think that connects to that transcendental desire of the soul for the good, like that. And when I mean good, I don't mean just obedient, righteous. I mean beauty of God's generous gifts to creation. And so that's different than the next point. The next point is actually the point of what is beautiful. There's the good, the beautiful, and I think that connects to our longing to belong. So there's the home longing, but there's also a belonging longing. It's this idea of not just wanting a place that is safe and lovely and warm and welcoming and that I feel part of, but a person, or at least a people that makes home beautiful. But maybe it's more of a one-on-one relationship with somebody, like a spouse, just that longing, that romantic longing to fall in love, or to have somebody fall in love with you, that desire in all of us to be loved, not just to be part of something, not just to be welcome in a place, but that desire to actually love and to reciprocate that, and to actually go and give love to people. There's something human about all of us that longs to belong to someone and have someone belong to us. And that's, this is the story of so many songs and so many movies and so many novels, is this beautiful longing, this longing for the beauty of kind of that romantic imagination. And then the third thing is the desire for what is true. And I call this the desire for whole, WHOLE, like to be whole. And I what I mean by that is, like, think of the veteran who comes off the battlefield after a few really hard tours, and he's not the same dad that you remembered back before he left 4 years ago. He's seen things that even your most creative movie directors would never put on a film. The psychological pieces of his soul have been left scattered all over the battlefield, and he comes back broken. And he reacts to things, and he can't handle certain things unlike the way he used to years ago. And there's just something, and then his body starts to fall apart because of the weight of the stress and the trauma and the memories that haunt him night after night. And it just breaks down his body as his soul is so broken. And and you look at that as a young child, and then you grow up into young manhood, and you see your father, his life just fractured. And it was only a 3 to 4 year stint that he did on the battlefield, and it's completely rewritten his script. And you think, but then then you learn later on that the war was not even worth fighting for, and it was all corruption from top to bottom. And then you're like, well, what did he give himself for? And then everything about it feels, if we're broken, feels lost. And it's just this, and it's people, they struggle with these things, these longings, making sense of why does my 8-year-old have cancer? Why did this earthquake just snuff out thousands of lives? And why are there still kids trapped under rubble? And you look at the brokenness of the world, and you just can't compute. It's incalculable, the weightiness of this. And so these are the patterns of the heart, the longings of the soul that I think these are the places that get through the watchful dragons of the soul that C.S. Lewis talked about, is speaking to the imagination through myth, through questions of imagination, or just analogies. I call them, and I'm not the only person who uses this term, but I call them sticky concepts, these metaphors, these analogies of life. Like C.S. Lewis was described by Alan Jacobs as having omnivorous attentiveness, like I said in the last episode. And it's just this boyish ability to wonder at everything, and just to kind of get past the heaviness of the fall and look into things, not look at things, but look into things and look into people, and wonder at what that could be like in the resurrection, and wonder at how it could be transformed by the gospel. If this person actually came to faith, what would his life be like? How would he be different? How would he, how would his eyes brighten up as though he tasted honey when he tasted the gospel? I mean, how could his family life be different? What kind of a church member would he be? How would he sing for joy? And you start to wonder at the possibility of transformation, and it gives you a different way of speaking to people. And then when people are talking to you, you can speak in a way that demonstrates the desirability of the gospel.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and as you were talking, it kind of made me think about even the reverse, like looking at a culture and like what is capturing their attention. Like one of the ideas that came to my mind was, I've been following the Beatles, just looking at their albums, their history, like what they're doing, why they did it. It's fascinating to me, especially coming out of World War II, the chaos of England, kind of the despair, a lot of loss of parents. Like why did George Harrison, especially George, but the other ones really get into, Indian mysticism? They had Christianity. Why did they get drawn to that? And it's like, so you start looking at the question of like, well, what were they looking for that wasn't being given to them in their story? The Christianity of that era of England was pretty broken, and looking for some answer to the peace, stability, meaning for life, something transcendent, drew them into a field that really, in the end, wasn't really able to satisfy them at all. Or why do young people get into certain video games? Why are they playing, games like Elden Ring, which has incredible lore and, this struggle to dominate and overcome and win and defeat the enemy and establish these things? Is partly, I think, as we look at that, we can drop back and go, well, we haven't told our stories well.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't captured that imagination. We haven't done good cultural apologetics to draw them into better stories that end up, explaining that. And it makes me kind of think, even like when we go to another culture, of being able to say, what is capturing that imagination? How do we tell our story in a way that gets people to think about the ultimate answer to their questions, not just these overly simplistic, surface level, like Hinduism in the end isn't really a cohesive way of thinking that is able to actually hold the ideas of the universe like Christianity is. So how do we tell that story better? It just was something that came to my mind as you were talking.
For sure. And each culture has to know its myths. That's important to the development of any people. And a missionary has to be able to enter into that language and that web of interconnected symbols. And so, Edie, not to move you along. I mean, this is an entire class, right? But I'm particularly interested in what we teased at the end of the last episode. Tell us a little bit about what that looked like, touching at those innate longings in the context of the Celtic cultures as the gospel came into that setting. And I'm thinking of some of the examples in particular from Northern Europe, also but particularly even with some things in the Celtic Cross itself, and how those visuals, and those are very visual. If you're listening to this on audio, you might miss out on some of the visuals that Edie's been sharing in his presentation. But talk to us some about those historical examples, everywhere from the Celtic Cross to even Yggdrasil, right? The tree. And there's so much there. People are thinking, oh no, Alex is speaking in tongues. I thought this was a Baptist podcast, but I'd love to hear you share some of those historic examples of how this has been done well in the history of the church and its mission.
Yeah. So just by way of wrapping up what I was saying, if anybody wants to dig into it more, my book, Ancient Gospel, Brave New World, the chapter 3 is all, I talk a lot about myth and kind of discerning the myth of different cultures and their value systems. And then my chapter on witness in Great Commission spirituality is basically me fleshing out those 3 longings of the soul on belonging, home, and wholeness. So if you want to dig in more, those 2 books have some of the content I just shared. Now this, with the Celtic Sun Cross, when I was doing my PhD, I took my supervisor was Michael Haken, and we did a whole course, PhD seminar on Celtic and patristic spirituality. So, and then not to mention, I had some other classes where I read about various Celtic missionaries and their approach to things. Now, the content for what I'm about to share has really been popularized by Glenn Sunshine, and he's done some phenomenal work on this for kind of the lay level.
Friend of the show.
Yeah, no, he's great. He's one of my favorite consequential thinkers out there. He's so brilliant, and so he's really brought this down to kind of put the cookies on the bottom shelf for us. And so I would recommend accessing any of his stuff on this. But the Celtic Sun Cross. The rumor was that St. John's Cross on Iona, the arms were too long and they kept falling down. And there was this big stone cross with big horizontal beams that just were too heavy. And over time, with erosion and rain and weather and whatever, they become brittle and they'd fall down. So then they put this circle superimposed behind, or I guess not superimposed, but put behind the cross beams to kind of hold them up. And then over time, the circle got wider to the point where the circle extended out to the ends of each of the beams, the top of the vertical beam and both ends of the horizontal beam, so that it's almost flush with the arms of the cross, and the cross arms just got shorter too. So if you think of, in most people, when they think of a Celtic cross, this is what they think of, is they think of this larger circle that extends to the perimeter of the short arms of the cross. But what's fascinating about this is what, some of this is speculation, of course, but from what we know from history and their approach to things, if you've ever read the book, How the Irish Saved Civilization, it is the story of the Irish missionaries taking the gospel back to kind of the uncivilized hordes of Europe, so to speak. After Rome fell, it was the Irish monastic missionary movement that, as Peter Brown in his great biography on Augustine says, it was like a soft cushion that caught the fall of the Roman Empire. It wasn't nearly as bad as they thought it would be because of these monastic missionary centers that were all over Europe and served as a way to kind of put the pieces back together of this fallen empire. And one of the ways they connected and communicated the gospel was, I think in some ways, it was through cultural apologetics. So like I said in the last episode, C.S. Lewis in recent generations has popularly spread the ideas of what we now call cultural apologetics, though he didn't use that term. But the Irish, I think they really pioneered this idea, and others have done it too. But they created this Celtic Sun Cross that looked kind of like a mandala or a mandala. There's two different ways to say it. So the mandala represents a tree of life, and in the tree of life you have above you have the heavens is representative of kind of the wisdom of heaven, and the roots go down to the bottom, and that represents the ancient, the realm of the dead, kind of the ancient world, the underworld, where people maybe receive wisdom from the spirits. And through the vertical part is kind of Middle Earth. This is where we all live. And the tree represents a source of knowledge and wisdom. So, you get knowledge and wisdom from the heavens and the ancients. And in the mandala, it also is a compass. So you have the north and the south and the east and the west. And so the north actually tends to be darker in northern hemispheres. And that's actually representative of the underworld, because that's where it's colder and darker. And then the south tends to be sunnier, and there is heaven. And that tends to be warmer in northern hemispheres. And they see it as the east represents the dawn. It's a representation of time. The south represents noon. The west is dusk, like the sun sets in the west, and the north is midnight, where it's the coldest and the darkest when the sun's not out. And it represents the times of the year, the calendar. The east is spring, the south is summer when it's warm, and the west is fall, and the north is winter when it's cold. And the patterns of life. The east is birth, just like in springtime. The south is youth, just like in summertime, with lots of energy. And the west is maturity, middle age. And then the north is old age and death. But this is the issue, is that the Celtic missionaries took what was true in the mandala, and then they superimposed this Roman cross over it, so that the tree of life becomes the cross of Christ. And what they're doing is they're communicating that Jesus Christ is Lord over all of space, time, and all things in existence, and that all the four corners of the compass, north, south, east, and west, heaven and earth, all the underworld are under his authority. Days and years and lifetime are under his authority. And it's basically saying that everything that they are seeing in this tree of life analogy that they have in their myth, the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of their worldview makes sense, rightly ordered under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And that's cultural apologetics.
And hearing that, I'll never quite look at a Celtic cross engraved on a Bible the same way. Adds so much meaning. ED, thank you for your ministry. And it's just a taste of the way that we can be defending the faith and sharing the faith. You can get more content from ED. You can search ED Burns over at the website of ABWE, which powers this show. You can go to abwe.org. You can see our other discussions with ED, as well as his writings on our website. He's written many books, and you can search his name on Amazon or with Founders Press. He's got several books with Founders Ministries as well. But ED, thank you for how you're leading our theological and our training efforts as well. And thank you for joining us. If you want to get more content, go to missionspodcast.com, including access to our exclusive group chat and, of course, bonus content that we didn't have time to include in today's show. You can get all of that. If you partner with the ministry at $9.99 per month, you'll get access to those things and a free gift for joining on as well. And so go to missionspodcast.com/premium and to learn more about how to take your next steps in making the gospel known to the ends of the earth. Go to abwe.org. Until our next episode, go make disciples of all the nations. Friends, when was the last time your church had a Missions Sunday? And how did it go? Did people take steps of obedience to the Great Commission? Or did the message go in one ear and out the other? Well, here at ABWE, our team has created a new resource that's everything that you need in one free resource packet to pull off an effective and biblically grounded Missions Sunday. We're calling it Send Sunday, based on Acts 13, where the first missionaries are sent out from a local church. This isn't just getting people to think about missions, it's challenging each church to ask the question, Lord, whom would you send out from our midst? And how can we hold the rope for them? Download everything that you need for Send Sunday, including sermon resources, a sample order of worship, lesson plans, small group discussion guides, a prayer guide, and more. Everything that you'll need to make sure that Send Sunday effectively challenges your congregation with what the Word of God says about missions. Go to missionspodcast.com/Send Sunday and get access now to this free toolkit. Again, missionspodcast.com/Send Sunday. And we'll celebrate Send Sunday with you on June 8th, 2025.